For a millennium, this landscape has changed only with the seasons. Now there is a different force for change in this corner of Britain's countryside, the M40 Motorway, bringing with it an end to this picture of rural peace. It took 21 years to agree the building of a link road over the 58 miles connecting Birmingham with Oxford, part of a new M40 motorway to carry traffic from the Midlands to London and the South Coast ports. This was the first step, the official start of construction of the northern section in October 1987.
I think it's very exciting to be here at the start of work on the M40 extension from Birmingham to Oxford. It's been long promised, and I know it's eagerly awaited in the West Midlands. And I think it will be a great stimulus to investment and prosperity here. For a modern and efficient economy, you obviously need a modern and efficient road system. And this £250 million extension of the M40 is in fact an investment in the future of the West Midlands. This road system that we are now inaugurating today, I hope will also help with traffic jams elsewhere. And in fact, our national road system is the victim of its own success, and we're acting to relieve congestion today.
The uncompleted motorway has already brought massive change to the landscape and to the lives of local residents. But this may be only the beginning of a major road-building assault on our natural environment. 10 years ago, the M40 was designated as Britain's last strategic highway. Since then, there has been a U-turn on transport policy. This year's white paper announced a £12 billion road-building programme, a new era of concrete and clay that will consume thousands of unspoilt acres across the country. The white paper, called Roads for Prosperity, sets out details of major investments in motorways and trunk roads to meet the needs of industry and other road users. This was the original blueprint for Britain's motorway system, linking key cities and manufacturing centres. The M40 motorway was the last piece in the jigsaw. The stretch from London to Oxford was built in the 1970s. What was left then was the link from Oxford to Britain's second city, Birmingham. In many areas, the route would drive through the middle of farms that have been worked for generations. South of Banbury, near King Sutton, is Manor Farm, the home of farmer Mike Stevens. He thought the coming of the motorway would bring financial compensation that would enable him to modernise and become more profitable. He never reckoned with the emotional impact on him and his family when his farm was cut in two.
When the motorway initially started, you thought, well, yes, I can make a bit of money here and I should be happy. Nobody told me how I would feel emotionally and how my way of life would change. I didn't expect this to happen at all, and I wasn't prepared for it. The contractors can't understand that at all. They're only here for 3 years. They've got a job to do. They'll build their road the most economic way that they can, make a profit and then disappear. I've got to farm the farm when they've gone. I've lived here all my life. So part of this land that's been taken has taken part of me with it. No compensation money will never repay any of those feelings. The whole effect of the motorway has taken a certain amount of pride away from my farming. I no longer have the same enthusiasm for the farm that I had when I first took it on.
I feel we're in limbo at the moment, waiting to see life after motorway construction, whether he will be able to farm it with the motorway going through once the contractors have finished, or whether he finds that, no, he can't do this.
I've lived here too long for my memory to fade. I can still look along the line of the motorway and see the farm how it used to be. I regard this road rather like an open scar that will never heal. The farm will never be Manor Farm again. It will be agricultural land split by a motorway.
Martin Nichols nearby also had a rude awakening. He never believed his wet meadow farm could ever be suitable as a motorway route. He was wrong.
We never really truthfully thought the motorway would come through this area. There were so many proposed routes, and I don't think we'd realised that we'd actually get this motorway put through this farm until we got nearly to the public inquiry. But I'm not so sure as this was the right route through all these wet meadows and this foggy area to put a motorway. It was horrific when they first started it. They were crossing the drive with machines and digging up everywhere and putting fences up, and nothing seemed to be our own at all. Can I speak to Mr. Barn, please? Martin Nichols, King Sutton. Sorry to trouble you again, but I think we've got a major problem now. My drive is disintegrated. They're crossing it with their heavy earth machinery stuff. There's no way we can get out. They're crossing with 2 earth movers and a bulldozer and a digger. It's caving in both sides. I think we shall soon need a Land Rover.
For the Nichols household, the motorway construction schedule brought a nightmare of noise, rubble and disruption as the motorway slowly took shape.
Well, this morning this area was running all over into the river. Look, you can see what they're putting in the river. Look at that sludge, look. That's deep. Look at it. That's in the river. They keep putting that down the river. My cattle are drinking that.
Through the middle of Martin Nichols' farm, there now runs a 30-foot embankment, with the traffic yet to come.
Now, this last 6 months, everything's quietened down. They've put all the fences up. Most of my drives all in now, and we don't bother them, and they don't bother us at all. The only problems now is that we have been getting a lot of dust.
Though the JCBs and pile drivers will soon depart, this rustic setting will never be the same. The Nichols family will have to adjust their lifestyle.
Bank holidays are beautiful and peaceful. It's like being back in the old times. You can lay in bed and hear the birds. And it's lovely. That is bank holidays. Normal working hours starts before 5 minutes to 6. We always have an alarm clock, which is the lorries coming in, and then the JCBs levelling all the stone. And this really frightens me for the motorway. Once the motorway is open, then it'll be continuous, non-stop, all day, 24 hours a day.
Obviously, I've had to reduce my numbers of cattle and sheep for the 14 acres I've lost. But I'm having to deal with 2 or 3 fields that are smaller now, and there's one piece that's cut off on the far side of the motorway that, in my opinion, we'll only be able to keep sheep in it from now on. It's hardly worth taking cattle into it.
Memories can be very fickle as regards to the scenery. It's hard to really think every single detail. that was there.
We're not looking forward to the motorway when it's open. But other than uproot ourselves and have to go and start all over again somewhere, we've just got to grin and bear it and try and survive off 110 acres.
Right, gentlemen. Martin Nichols speeding, been caked outside. And a real football affair, gentlemen. 28, 24 and mid, 15, 16, 17 and mid, 17, 18, 2, 18, 5, 18.
But not everybody is a victim of the motorway, like Martin Nichols. Banbury, a market town just 4 miles away, will bustle and prosper when the M40 opens for business, and some of the locals can't wait.
The Banbury market is very strategically situated, being more or less in the middle of England. We're right in the prime feeding lands of South Northamptonshire, good feeding land in Oxfordshire and in Warwickshire. So strategically, it's very, very well situated for handling livestock.
25 mid, 25 Gordon.
The motorway can't come quick enough as far as we're concerned. We are looking for our business to expand significantly with a better road network. And Banbury, historically, has been very badly roaded for many, many years. Even when we get the new M40, it'll still make access to the eastern counties fairly difficult. You know, we really need a motorway to Norfolk. We are preparing the motorway opening. In actual fact, we're preparing for the route to Europe, and we are already looking to develop a stronger European connection. So we're particularly excited that we'll be able to export livestock to Europe. In fact, we should have them at the coast from Banbury within 3 hours. And it's not very long across the Channel and into France. So that's a particularly exciting piece of business for us. Banbury's bound to change. Being situated on the motorway, historically, anywhere that's situated on the motorway, there's a lot more industry, and they tend to become distribution centres. And Banbury, to my mind, being in the centre of England, will become a major distribution centre. I don't think the local people, with due respect to them, probably realise how much it is going to change.
It's business factors like these that will, literally, change the face of this old market town. A key issue is property values. The town's position on a junction of the M40 has made it a prime site of high-price acres ripe for redevelopment, and a target for property specialists like John Harper.
Back in the 60s, there was a bypass plan for Banbury, which was to go round the other side from the motorway. And there was very considerable pressure for the bypass to be built. And so we now have people in Banbury thinking of the motorway as a bypass, whereas it in fact is a major line of communication between the first city and the second city in the land. I certainly believe that the business community is ready for the motorway and for the changes that will take place. I'm not quite sure whether the local people realise what is going to happen to Banbury. As far as the council is concerned, I think they're at last realising what is going to happen. And I think they suddenly realise that there is going to be a major commercial development. Banbury is ideally suited for a major office centre. A lot of derelict sites have changed hands, and building work is already taking place. Many sites are in the process of being brought forward for development. Investing institutions wish to invest in the area, and a number of major companies have already been to look at the area. They like what they see, and I believe it is going to be a major growth area. My view is if the motorway hadn't come, I think Banbury would have stayed a small town, and it would have stayed not more than 40,000 as it is at the moment. My belief is that by the year 2000, Banbury will have a population in the region of 60,000.
The local council believe that development should be contained on the town side of the motorway to prevent urban sprawl. But will it? Already, farms on the outskirts of Banbury on the other side of the motorway route are being eyed by developers. This one, 140 acres, was bought earlier this year for nearly £700,000, well above the market price for farmland. It was a green farm, cultivated without the use of modern fertilizers. For farmer Frank Colgrave, the sale spells the end of 3 generations of farming here. For him, there is now a burning question. If the land is to be kept for agriculture, why has it been bought by a financial institution?
In spite of the local council suggesting that the road is to be a barrier, I fail to understand why developers have bought this land. And I rather fear that a vast area is rather under threat. I would much rather a farmer had bought this land to continue it as I've always farmed it. But no, it appears to me that this is not the case, and that the developers have something else in mind.
The Banbury 20 Cricket Club was founded in 1932 by 20 local lads. Its grass table is highly regarded. The county team often plays here. The ground used to be in open countryside, but it too has been overtaken by creeping development. Now it's hard by the new M40, and there are plans to build a leisure and hotel complex on the site.
The town plan was issued this year, which earmarks this ground as part of a hotel and leisure development. To date, we have not received any applications as such or been put under any pressure, although we are expecting that to start fairly shortly. What we have to do in negotiating with developers is to get over very much what we are here for, why the club exists, why people keep coming down here, and what we look to get out of the club. And that is not money orientated. It's something much more fundamental than money. People may come along with X million pounds or whatever, but we are not a financial institution. We're here primarily for cricket. It is no good pocketing money if you can't continue all the good work that has been done by the past members of this club for 57 years. We see Banbury changing very much, obviously, with the explosion that is predicted in population. Where it, from a town point of view, could be dangerous, of course, is that we become totally a commuter town, and people are only here for the weekends, looking for the benefits of the social activities of weekends, but not being able or prepared to put any work into making them happen.
Originally, the M40 was seen as a road to relieve traffic pressures from towns like Banbury.
This road behind me is described as the Banbury bypass, and I think that in the first instance, Banbury will enjoy some relief from through traffic. In the longer term, Banbury, I think, is likely to become a much more developed area. It's part of what you might call the process of suburbanization of England, as you have these motorways attracting people out into the countryside. So I think in the long run, there are likely to be far more people drawn into the area, and Banbury will be quite transformed. It will be quite a different town, and I suspect a town with much more traffic.
In the short space of 18 months, centuries of rural tradition have been replaced by the infrastructure of the age of the car. These hedgerows, fields, even the Banbury 20 Cricket Club are now threatened by immeasurable change. In 1982, a public inquiry decided there was a need for the M40. But exactly where it should go became the subject of vociferous debate. At that inquiry, all the route was settled, except a 12.5-mile section near Oxford, which proved a serious sticking point. The Department of Transport proposed a route that cut across the ancient Otmore. The locals said no. A powerful lobby group was formed that put forward an alternative route further to the east. This route, they claimed, would protect the moor. The Department of Transport, surprisingly, lost its case for Otmore, and then, in an amazing about-turn, announced their alternative route, the preferred route known as PR. It was almost identical to the one they had earlier opposed. But the PR option meant that people who hadn't expected to have a motorway in their backyard were now presented with an unpleasant prospect.
Just saying that this was the route you opposed last time.
Certainly, yes. This was very similar to the objectors' alternative that was put forward at the 82-83 inquiry. And obviously at that stage, the department's preferred route was what was known as the Otmore route.
Yes.
And we were arguing in favour of that.
Now you've got to argue in favour of the one which you spent how many months? 6 months, £2 million opposing.
Another powerful pressure group was created, the Tomley and Burnwood Association. They argued that this missing link should not cross open countryside if it could be routed somewhere else.
The Tomley and Burnwood Association was formed earlier this year, and this association was formed to try and find an alternative route to the routes that have been proposed across totally open countryside. We believe that these motorway routes can go closer to existing urbanisation, because we also believe that if they go across open countryside, in the way that this is proposed, it will bring urbanisation itself.
I wondered about
the reason that we're meeting here tonight is to go into the Whitecross Greenwood to listen to the nightingales, because if the motorway comes along the proposed route, we will never hear them again in this wood.
I don't think that anyone knows what the effects of the motorway would be on the nightingales breeding here, but it's the fact that you've got this splendid bit of England with the nightingale, which is such a typical bird that one thinks of in the woods in the summer, and to come out here and listen to the roar of traffic instead of this beautiful peace and these birds singing in a site that's considered to be probably the best site for nightingales in Oxfordshire, and possibly in Buckinghamshire as well. It seems vandalism to me to do that.
The protesters forced another public inquiry. They knew that to be successful they would need to hire top legal counsel and present a viable alternative route, like the Otmore group before them. By August 1987, this had been achieved. Known as D7, their route hugged the existing Oxford Ring Road. It was one of 22 routes proposed by objectors at the inquiry when it opened in Bicester in front of the inspector, Sir Michael Giddings.
Thank you, sir. Sir, before I start cross-examination this morning, I'd like to make a very short opening statement on behalf of the Tomley and Burnwood Association about the matters upon which you have to make a determination. Sir, the Otmore route was scrutinised carefully by the inspector who held that previous inquiry. He got to know the territory. So we hope you'll get to know the territory through which PR passes. We say, sir, that the Otmore landscape is an example of what makes an inspector refuse to recommend a motorway route. No motorway, sir, should be routed through the landscape of Otmore on landscape grounds. Those are the criteria which the Secretary of State has set down and laid. We come, sir, to the same conclusion as the Department of Transport did at the 82-83 inquiry, that there would be no environmental advantage with PR over Otmore. Sir, but what is quite so vulgar and invidious about taking any comparative exercise is that, of course, a road should never be built in either place.
It certainly would be highly desirable if the matter could be settled at this inquiry. But the fact is that unless I recommend the present published proposals without any real qualification, the matter won't be settled. It's quite likely there would have to be a further inquiry if I select an alternative route.
But while the public inquiry proceeded, the M40 building programme continued. Delay in deciding the route of the southern section was becoming a major issue. If the northern section was completed before the southern section, traffic would struggle between two ends of the motorway on already overcrowded local roads. Small villages hoping for relief from the M40 would instead be choked by thousands of extra cars and juggernauts, and Oxford's roads would grind to a halt.
We believe that each generation has a responsibility to maintain, and if possible, to enhance the environment which it inherits as trustee before passing it on to succeeding generations. So we debated the issue. If the Pansfield route is wrong, then where is the right route? We asked ourselves whether we should join or promote a campaign to re-examine the Ottermore route. This Ottermore proposal seemed to us marginally less damaging to the countryside and to communities than the routes down Pans Hill. And no doubt a good case for a very lot more route could be made. However, the same basic principles for opposition apply, and that is, do not ruin open countryside when there is an alternative.
For many objectors, the ideal solution would take the motorway to within sight of Oxford's dreaming spires. The outskirts of the city, they said, were already built up with suburban housing. But how would these homeowners react to the D7 proposal that would put 6 lanes of carriageway and thousands of vehicles a day through their neighbourhood? If D7 was approved, there would be another time-consuming inquiry. It was well known that the people of Oxford were highly effective at resisting road schemes that threatened their surroundings. The inquiry ended in January 1988 after 6 months of hearings. Local objectors were confident they would win the day.
I think it's a very solid case, yes, and a very reasonable case that a motorway doesn't belong in open countryside. It belongs in existing road corridors, and that it's a criminal thing to do, to take beautiful unspoiled countryside and carve it up with a motorway. And that's the reason I've been here all this time, to defend the countryside.
Sir Michael Giddings wrote his report and delivered it to the Secretaries of State for Transport and the Environment in July 1988. Acknowledged the strength of the Tomley and Burnwood Association's case when it said, "I conclude that there possibly is a prima facie case for D7, which, in an ideal and fairer world, would call for more rigorous exploration to determine its true value." And he added that he felt that the Department of Transport had concentrated its arguments far too much on the need to avoid delay. However, in the end, he felt he could not justify the chaos which years of a missing link would bring.
In designing this Waterstock-Wendlesbury section, an immense effort has been made to minimise the effects on the environment. We've devised an extensive landscape scheme to help blend the new road into its surroundings. I'd like to congratulate all those concerned so far, and I hope that this will be the start of a road of which we can as a country be proud, and which will do the least possible environmental damage to Oxfordshire, and that the people of Oxfordshire will feel that we really have taken trouble to try and minimise the impact upon them.
A week later, the contractors moved in to begin work on the final southern section. But the pressures of objectors and counter-objectors had obscured a more basic issue. Why build a motorway in the first place? Back in 1982, organisations like the Council for the Protection of Rural England had opposed the M40 in its entirety. To CPRE, the exact route was irrelevant. Wherever it went, urban sprawl and development would follow.
First of all, simply driving a motorway through countryside like this brings an enormous physical change. A slab of concrete and the noise and associated feeling of intrusion from a motorway would be very profound indeed. But perhaps more insidious and of concern in the long term is the fact that at every junction of the motorway there will be new development. There'll be, for example, superstores, out-of-town shopping centres, just warehousing and people who want to be close to a motorway for those reasons. New businesses are attracted to a motorway because they feel it's on an important transport route. And that will create a need for new housing. The new housing will create a need ultimately for schools and all the other facilities that go with communities. And eventually the whole character of the area will change. It will no longer be a very precious piece of rural England with a character all of its own. It'll be another part of suburbia, an England which could be almost anywhere.
In this sense, the Otmore protesters didn't really win. Radical transformation will affect the entire county and beyond. And this is only the start. According to this year's White Paper, 2,700 miles of new roads are to be built to cope, according to the Department of Transport, with an explosion in vehicle numbers over the next 30 years.
I'm afraid the traffic's going to be created anyway. The question is whether you cater for it or whether you allow congestion to grow and you just have endless frustrating journeys all over the country. Car ownership in this country is less than in either France or Germany. I'm sure it's going to grow. All the forecasts show it's going to grow as we have economic prosperity. People want to travel. It represents freedom to them in many ways. And also for our business reasons, you're going to see a lot of goods go by road. And that's true in every country in Europe. And if we decide just not to cater for it, well, then Britain is going to be hampered enormously in her efforts to compete with the rest of the community.
At one level, it's impossible to snap your fingers and deliver 2,700 miles of road across our countryside. But at another level, the government could simply try to force it through with very serious implications for public participation and involvement in decisions. But I believe there's a groundswell of opinion now against new roads, or certainly against new roads at all costs. And that opinion is showing itself in areas like this, where people have actually physically seen the impact of a new road and all the other pressures that it brings. People are also questioning the viability of a transport policy that relies on new miles of road as a solution to some of the very serious problems that we have.
There seems to be a serious flaw in the government view that more motorways will solve Britain's traffic congestion in the future. To begin with, that congestion is not a static problem. The numbers of vehicles cramming onto the nation's roads is forecast to grow with each passing year. Many transport specialists argue that building more roads merely encourages people to buy even more cars and use them more often. Motorways simply deliver them to already congested towns. And then there are lorries. Britain's businesses are becoming geared to the distribution of raw materials and finished products by road. An enormous traffic load has shifted from the railways to an overburdened motorway network.
They describe their £12 billion programme as the biggest road building programme in the history of the country, and it hasn't the slightest prospect of solving the congestion problem, because if you add it all up, it could add perhaps as much as 2% the capacity of the country's road system. And that is to accommodate what they forecast will be a 142% increase in traffic. So by their own figures, they haven't a chance of solving the problem that they've identified. The White Paper Roads for Prosperity assumes that before the increase in the country's vehicle population ceases, there will be more than twice as many motor vehicles on the road as there now are. There are currently about 23 million. They're assuming that there will be at least another 25 million. Now, what would another 25 million vehicles look like? One way of imagining it, I suppose, is it would form a queue about 100,000 miles long. The parking requirement for all this extra traffic alone would require paving over an area about the size of Berkshire.
The White Paper promises to deal with that looming congestion crisis with a greatly expanded road programme, what Whitehall describes as a step change in its transport policy. Traffic experts like John Adams say a revolutionary new approach is needed to restrain the car, giving people alternatives to using their motor vehicles, thus relieving the pressure on urban roads.
This road runs from Birmingham in that direction to London down there. and traffic on the bit that we're standing on will probably flow very quickly. But when you get to the inner end in London, the inner end of Westway, you encounter a set of traffic lights, and they are controlled by traffic controllers in Scotland Yard, and they adjust the timing of the lights to ensure that the traffic from the M40 will trickle at a controlled rate into London so that it won't cause the existing congestion in London to get any worse. So what this road will be doing will be speeding people to the back of the queue on Westway. There's no solution in the direction in which they're currently proceeding. We are, according to their forecasts, halfway approximately to the saturation level of car ownership. There isn't any prospect of building enough road capacity to get all the way there. The longer we persist in trying, the worse things will get.
If we continue with current policies, says Adams, Britain's cities will collapse under the strain, pushing housing and businesses outwards to the suburbs, thus reinforcing the need for more cars to get about. And so the vicious circle tightens. The tragedy is that motorways were heralded as saviours of the cities, concrete conduits that would ease the weight of traffic congestion. They seem to have achieved the opposite effect, pouring ever-increasing vehicle numbers into city centres. And we, the driving public, rarely sit and think about the true costs. We have fallen in love with the motor car.
I think for a long time people have managed to conceal from themselves the true costs of their desires with respect to motoring. They've imagined the freedom and the access to the good things in life that come with a car, and they haven't acknowledged the costs of it all. If the whole world were to aspire to the levels of car ownership that one finds the white paper aspiring to, we would be looking at a tenfold increase in the number of cars in the world. Environmentally, it would be catastrophic.
And that is the other invisible cost, pollution. Catalytic converters and lead-free petrol are helping cut harmful emission gases as well as lead. But scientists point out that the most serious threat challenging the world is the greenhouse effect, or global warming. A major cause is carbon dioxide, CO2. One source of CO2 is vehicle exhausts. And for CO2, there is no technological fix. The greenhouse danger is now so great that even convinced free enterprise politicians like Margaret Thatcher have been converted to the need for drastic action.
Engineering and scientific advance has given us transport by land and air, and the capacity and need to exploit fossil fuels which had lain unused for millions of years. One result is a vast increase in carbon dioxide. For generations, we have assumed that the efforts of mankind would leave the fundamental equilibrium of the world's systems and atmosphere stable. But it's possible that we have unwittingly begun a massive experiment with the system of this planet itself.
It's now a year since Mrs. Thatcher made her famous Green speech, in which she put the environmental problems we face, in particular the problem of global warming, higher than ever before on the public and the political agenda. And in the same year, the Department of Transport produced their white paper, Roads for Prosperity, which cheerfully announces we can expect probably more than a doubling in car use, and tells us this is a good thing because it's a sign of prosperity. But it seems to have no comprehension at all of what that will mean in terms of pollution, and in particular what that will mean in terms of the greenhouse effect that Mrs. Thatcher professes to be so worried about.
It's estimated that in Britain, road vehicles account for about 17% of the country's output of CO2, more than 1/6 of the total, and it's growing fast. If the White Paper's forecasts are accurate, Britain's rapidly growing vehicle population could double its contribution to CO2 emissions by 2025.
If the government's transport forecasts come true, if we do have an 142% increase in vehicle miles by the year 2025, then all the benefits we've achieved by reducing nitrogen oxides, hydrocarbons and carbon monoxide, by fitting three-way catalysts to cars, will be completely overtaken. And those emissions will start to rise again very soon after the turn of the century. Meanwhile, carbon dioxide will be increasing. The only way to reduce carbon dioxide is to burn less fuel. And ultimately, that means either bringing in extremely fuel-efficient cars and, in the long term, looking at actually using cars less.
Solutions like that call for a different kind of Britain. A Britain that has broken off its love affair with the combustion engine and put aside its vision of unbridled economic growth. But the debate does pinpoint a contradiction in government policies. While the Department of the Environment, as its very name implies, works hard for cleaner air and a more attractive landscape, nearby at the Department of Transport, the taste for new roads continues unchecked.
Over the last year, the Department of the Environment have carried out a whole series of consultations aimed at improving our system of pollution control, and they have actively sought the input of voluntary organisations, environmental groups, the public, even other government institutions. By contrast, the Department of Transport, with Roads to Prosperity, has a completely different approach. There's virtually no consultation. The paper itself is both arrogant and almost entirely ignorant of environmental considerations. We can only assume that either they didn't consult the Department of Environment at all, or if they did, whatever comments the Department of Environment made were ignored.
Meanwhile, the M40 nears completion. It has brought immense and permanent change to a vast swathe of England's countryside in the space of a few months.
Rate of change is a critical issue. A year ago, this area was green fields. Now there's a motorway about to be open. By the beginning of 1990, thousands of cars will be passing this point. So this is a very rapid rate of change in the activities which are creating the problem, which are creating the greenhouse problem. And the rate of change in the environment that these are inducing is also without precedent. The change in climate that we envisage taking place over the next 30 or 40 years, there's no parallel for 10,000 years or so.
Global challenges demand global answers. Perhaps a fundamental rethink of the way we view our national transport system, to wean us away from heavy dependence on polluting fossil fuels and cut pollution levels before they overwhelm the planet. Around the world, there are striking examples of how it can be done. The state of California, for instance, has brought in tough new laws to encourage drivers to use fuels other than petrol and cut down on vehicle usage. The depths of the danger from global warming may call for even more draconian measures. At the 1988 Toronto conference, global warming was recognized by the participants as second only to nuclear war in its devastating implications. The United Nations Environment Programme aims to have a global convention in place by the mid-90s to limit emissions of major greenhouse gases. The 1990s have been described as the turnaround decade, the time of choice for mankind, when the first substantial impact of global warming will be felt. Something clearly has to be done.
There has to be a complete rethink of transport policy in this country. But there are so many options the government has in the short term for reducing carbon dioxide from vehicles. For example, just actually enforcing existing speed limits, and even better, reducing them by 10 miles an hour, would reduce fuel consumption and therefore emissions of all polluting gases and carbon dioxide to a very great extent. And we would like to see proper enforcement of speed limits now, and in the very near future, a decrease in speed limits. In the medium term, what we need are very fuel-efficient cars. We already know that prototypes have been developed which can reach average miles per gallon of 145. And this is just not very unusual anymore. All the big automobile manufacturers have produced these prototypes. At the moment, there is no will to introduce them commercially because oil prices are cheap. and we are moving towards larger and larger cars as a result. What we have to do is bring those fuel-efficient vehicles onto the market, and in my view, the only way to do that is for the government to set standards for fuel efficiency.
But would Britain's drivers accept a different kind of driving, when today's emphasis is on performance rather than economy, whatever the effect on the environment? The post-war boom in vehicle ownership and road building is part of a wider debate. A debate about social goals and individual ambitions. As a society, we are committed to steadily increasing prosperity. Growth has become an article of national faith. If we are to take a radical new direction in transport policy, a compromise has to be reached between economic expansion and the need for a sane approach on environmental protection. Take freight. The thundering trucks that fill our motorways are symbols of our pursuit of maximum wealth creation. Are we prepared to live with the consequences of this outlook? Or can we seek a transport formula that creates health as well as wealth, that eliminates the constant need for motorways by redistributing Britain's freight burden across other forms of transportation?
You have to improve the environment in a range of measures that you can, but you mustn't unilaterally say that Britain alone of the European countries is to be doomed to poor transport, worse roads, traffic jams, congestion, extra business costs, and falling behind in economic growth as a result of it. That can't be in the right interests of Britain either. You've got to try and pursue environmentally sound policies, but also to keep Britain on the move, and I think that we have the balance of that about right.
Paul Channon has been replaced as Secretary of State for Transport, but there are no signs of a major review of policy. The central question is, where lies the most sensible road to prosperity? The answer could have huge consequences not only for our economy, but for the natural habitat without which we cannot live. One thing does seem certain. If we build more roads and drive more cars and lorries, this world will change for the worse, and sooner than we think. In nature, tomorrow always comes.
If we continue along the same road on which we've been travelling, then we face major climatic change, substantial alteration in the environment. We continue polluting the atmosphere without a thought for the long-term consequences. But there is an alternative. We can change the manner in which we've been achieving growth, the manner in which we've been developing. We can cut emissions of the greenhouse gases. However, we must recognize if we do that, then we face a radical change in our way of living, in our lifestyles, because to limit global warming will require a reduction in, for example, carbon dioxide emissions by around 50% over the next 20 or 30 years. And that will mean change in individual lifestyles.
In just 18 months, this countryside has been totally transformed. Soon the lorries and cars will thunder between Birmingham and London. Will the M40, as was believed a decade ago, be the last strategic highway in Britain? Or will it be followed by mile after mile of new roads stretching into the future? We stand on the brink of a crucial choice.